So, Crimson Desert. This is, without a doubt, going to be the most I, I've never really understood it. If you love the game, you love the game, irrespective of what anyone's opinion is. But as I've said, we've started to react in the way that the market reacts to to a product, how a product is received. And I do believe a large part of the problem here is this trend of more games, more studios that used to be privately owned, making this shift to become publicly traded companies. I've long said, I've said it a few times here on the channel that the moment a studio moves from private to public, it's a good indication that the studio is moving in the wrong direction. A good example of this was, CDPR with the Witcher franchise, right? They released the first Witcher series, which was mildly successful. It wasn't a huge hit. But then the second game, they garnered more fans and more gamers grew to, expect a certain quality of gaming from them. The games were buggy. I know people have short memories, or they look fondly at the Witcher games, but they were quite flawed and filled with a lot of jank when they came out. But they were still beloved regardless. They didn't need to be perfect to be enjoyed, and they didn't need to be a 10 out of 10 or a masterpiece for people to enjoy the games. Then we got to Witcher 3, right? By that point, the studio had built up a reputation. Again, fans have loved what they've done with the first two games. And this was, more of the same, except they have now expanded the world. But the expectation was still the same with The Witcher 3. There were no shareholders that they were beholden to at the time. The game itself was still flawed. I personally recall, because I played Witcher 3 first, and then I worked my way back to the other titles. And so I personally, or more vividly, remember the issues with Witcher 3, right? They had issues with storage where you only had one storage location initially, so you had to sort of backtrack to this one location just to place items when your inventory got full, right? There were game-breaking bugs where certain quests that couldn't be completed that kind of killed the main line, and you had to load an older save to not lock yourself out of the games. I remember there were issues where fall damage from a small ledge would actually kill you. Right, so the game was flawed in itself when it was released. There was no expectation that the game needed to be perfect. It didn't need to be a masterpiece, but people loved it. The jank was there. The issues were there, but they were secondary to everything else that was included in the game. The story was still fantastic. The characters were lovable, and the gameplay and mechanic was not the best in the industry by any measure, but it was still good. People recognized the flaws, and they loved the game regardless. They didn't need someone to tell them to love the game, and they didn't need the game to be a 10 out of 10 masterpiece for it to be loved. Now, of course, following that, a series of patches and updates, the game has improved over the years, and now people call it a masterpiece. But if you were there at launch, the game was not launched in a perfect state. And then came the moment when CDPR took the company public, right? And this happened during Witcher 3 development. So it was towards the end of the development cycle, going into Cyberpunk 2077. One of the, if not the most disastrous game launch in video game history with Cyberpunk 2077. And that was, in my mind, a direct result of them deciding to take the company public. What people don't recognize at the moment is that once a company decides to take the company, once a studio decides to take the company public, their main priority is no longer making a good game. Their priority is their fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders. Their shareholders are now their priority. Most of the well-known IP and video game franchises that we've all come to love and know, these were created by just a group of friends coming together. At times, they would just start creating this thing in their basement, or they'll form a private company where they just start working on this game. But their priority was always Let's make a game that we would enjoy playing. That's the difference, right, between the private and publicly owned companies. So in my mind, it is related. I do think the more companies are shifting from privately owned to public, um, you've now taken the passion and drive out of the developer's hands, and it's now just selling the art to a corporation whose only concern is when's the next product going to be coming out. So we look back to Pearl Abyss here, and it's no different, right? As we see the share prices fall and more information comes out about the what was happening behind the scenes, it's evident that this game, Crimson Desert, was intended to be a follow-up to Black Desert Online. Then, obviously, again, being a publicly traded company, someone recognized that, okay, why do that when you could just release? Looking at this tech demo that they've seen and said, why do a follow-up to that game when you could just try to turn it into a single player game? This would definitely be more profitable. The decision wasn't made because they decided because they wanted to make a single player game, or that this fit into the story that they've created at any point so far. Which is one of the reasons why the game feels so disconnected and disjointed. As if there's a story missing somewhere in between that you're supposed to be caught up on, but no one told you. So I think gamers need to ask themselves whether this is the best that we can do. And that's not to shade Crimson Desert. As I've said before, I think games like this need to exist. They should exist. Games that are not masterpieces, but can be enjoyed. I felt the same way about Black Myth Wukong that I played over a year ago. It wasn't a perfect game. You know, I personally didn't believe it was a masterpiece, but it was still my favorite game of that year. It had some slight, it needed a few more months to be refined and polished. There were a few bugs, um, voice acting, lip syncing, and stuff like that. Some of the instructions weren't clear on the skill tree. Of course, the mapping and so on also needed some work. So it wasn't a perfect game, but it was my favorite game of that year. So I do think we need a space for games like Crimson Desert, but I would never go online and say to someone that they shouldn't criticize they shouldn't criticize Black Myth Wukong because that would somehow smear my enjoyment of the game. No, I don't care. And I enjoyed the game for what it was. And I would hope that the developers, would try to learn from that with the next title so that it's a bit more polished. But that is what we're seeing now with Crimson Desert. It's that toxic positivity, right? Where um, some people feel the game has to be a masterpiece, it has to be a success, or it has to be a 10 out of 10 for it to be an enjoyable game. Yeah, we don't want to go down that road. I don't think that's a bar that we want to set, because if it is that we recognize the damage that gaming journalism has done in the past, we can't fall we can't repeat the same mistake on the other side, right? By saying, yes, these are a list of things that IGN, for example, have been guilty of in the past, but we're going to overlook everything in this game and praise it and say that it's a 10 out of 10. How is that any different, right? We're just using a different set of check boxes, but we're still checking boxes. So we need we need to have a better perspective, or start having more honest conversations about these games. That there is a place for games to be criticized. That is something that we should encourage. If we don't criticize and or provide constructive criticism, let me put it that way. If we don't provide constructive criticism, then how can the games get better, right? The games will never get better. So we do have to allow room for that, and it doesn't have to be that serious, right? Have fun with it. This is a hobby that we should be enjoying, and we should be laughing at some of the jank in Crimson Desert and having fun with it. Um, and then just highlighting that for Pearl Abyss to address going forward, right? So that is where I think we need to go. We need to get back to a point where we can have very honest conversations about the games, very constructive criticisms, not just dismiss them as hate unnecessarily, and not this toxic positivity where we need everything to be praised in order for us to enjoy it. If you enjoy the game, then we enjoy the game. We should be able to have a conversation and discussion about what works in the game and what really doesn't. But that is where we need that is what we need to aim for, right? The issue with publicly traded games, that is one that is unfortunately not going to be solved overnight. I'm not sure what the solution is there, because even if, in the example that I gave with CDPR, what is the reason that drives these companies to then want to take the company public? So, CDPR was doing relatively well with Witcher 3 in terms of sales. There was no need for them to take the company public, and yet they still did it. And what we're seeing now is that the majority of the people who worked on the Witcher series, they've all left the company, right? So what is it that is driving these developers to sort of give up, or I don't know, I would say give up ownership of their product? Because there was no need for them to do that. They could have gotten funding for Cyberpunk 2077, from the Witcher 3 success. That is something that's probably worth exploring in a separate video. Why these smaller companies, once they achieve success in the industry, why is it they choose to take the company public? All we can say with certainty at this point is that, without a doubt, whenever they do take the company public, the end result is usually the same. Not always, but it is usually the same, which is a dip in quality in the product that they produce. And once that happens enough times, eventually it leads to the company's downfall. We've seen it happen numerous times. We laugh at Ubisoft, but we've seen where that company is heading. Activision, all these companies that started, as just a small studio, once they achieve success, they take the company public, and then the people who created the company, they all abandon it, and then it becomes a shell of what it used to be, and then it falls apart. That's perhaps something for me to for us to discuss in a separate video. But where Crimson Desert is concerned, just to summarize, as I've said, I think this is a good game. It has good elements in it, but the developers were trying to do too much, right? And this was clear from the initial trailers that we saw, that this was a hodgepodge of different mechanics from other games that they've put together. And whenever you do that, it intentionally or not, it means that you do not excel at any one of those things. And that is what we're seeing here with Crimson Desert, right? They've under-delivered in certain aspects of the game, right? And even though there's a lot to do, it feels more like a sequence of events that you're going through. Not so much, quests that have depth or weight to them, right? You're just going through the motions. Had they scaled the game back, scaled the scope back, and told even a more linear story, or it could even have remained open world, but sort of stay within one genre, right? The game could have been twice as better as it currently is now. So that is my verdict on the game so far. Yeah, or if you are playing Crimson Desert and you are enjoying it, I'm glad that you found a game to enjoy. Everyone doesn't need to love the game. I don't particularly love it, but I can still praise the things that it does right. And I think we need more games like that. The games that are not striving for perfection, not trying to be masterpieces, not trying to be 10 out of 10s, but just providing the players with an overall good experience. And that's all we can ask for.